welcome to the Deal Finder Corner. So this is your property, your weekly property talk show brought to you by Property Filter, hosted by myself, Guillaume Black, your favorite Frenchman, CEO and co-founder at Property Filter. So as you know, it's the UK's highest rated platform to find deals, and we are on a mission to empower our property investor and deal sourcing members to find another 1,000 deals this year, thanks to the Property Filter blueprint. And the purpose with those Deal Finder Corner is to give you more and the best of the available resources by inviting expert guests who will share with you the latest, most current strategies and tactics or things that actually works right now in terms of finding, making deals, and the reality of systemizing and running a high-performance business in property. So it really is my pleasure today to introduce you to my good friend, Dillon Dhanecha, on today's Deal Finder Corner. And you'll see he's got an incredible story. So inspired by the family that took his parents in as refugees in 1972, Dillon has been quietly making tracks in the social housing space since his earliest work with housing homeless young people to his more recent focus on asylum seekers and refugees. So he went from six-figure in depth. All the way to become self-made social millionaire, spiritual money mentor, and social housing provider. Dillon has built on the sacrifices, spirituality, and the social mindedness of his refugee parents to build a life around the triple bottom line of income, impact, and influence. His successes as a trader, entrepreneur, and philanthropist have been featured in front of lots of media outlets such as the Independent Sunday Money section, BBC Breakfast, Forbes Success Economics, and commented by the United Nations Economics Commission for Africa, and mind you, His Majesty's Inspectorate for Constabularies, so a new word for the Frenchman, and other public bodies. So Dillon has partners with people like Brian Tracy on money mindset programs, delivered TED Talks on his work in Africa, and is frequently invited to give keynote speeches, podcast interviews about the money mentorship, and all things related to the influence in property, wealth, and the spiritual niches. So what you can expect from today's episode. So Dillon, we go through the social housing strategy matrix, the 3 make or break mistakes to avoid in this sector, the biggest opportunities in this space throughout 2024 up to 2026. And then we follow the session with an exclusive Q&A. So I am very much looking forward to hearing more about Dillon's talk today. So please give a massive virtual welcome to Mr. Dillon Dhanecha. Over to you, mate.
Thank you so much. That's absolutely, I don't know about you, Guillaume, but whenever I hear my bio being read out, it always feels a little in here like some kind of mad dream come true. And I guess for some context, so number one, thank you so much for putting this together. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing at Property Filter. I absolutely love the platform, but more than that, what I love is just the values that are so integral to the business, and that's where I think you and I have a real strong resonance. So thank you for putting this together. Thank you for everything that you're doing at Property Filter. It really is changing the world of investment as we've known it for 10 or 15 years. Thank you to everyone here for taking the time to come and listen to me. Hopefully not whittle on, and hopefully give you some, I guess, some inspiration, some insight, some instruction on how you as a novice or an experienced property investor can enter this slightly murky, almost complex world of social housing. And very rarely do we hear it spoken of as murky and complex. Normally what we're used to hearing is, get into social housing for guaranteed rent, 60-month tenancies, no maintenance, and off you go. And that is the outcome, for sure. That's the outcome. At the end of your journey, from first deciding that you want to be in this sector to kind of just watching that income coming in and looking at the family stories of the people that you're housing, and that's the beautiful end. But there's a process by which to get there, and to get there in a way that de-risks your investment and allows you to build long-term lasting partnerships with providers. And that really, they're really the 2 key things you want to think about: in decreasing the investment, de-risking the investment, obviously, and building long-term partnerships with providers. Neither of which I did in my earliest days. In fact, my very first foray into social housing was taking a call from the homeless team. I do a lot of work with the homeless team. I'm based in Peterborough. Do a lot of work with the homeless team here, and I took a call from them saying, hey, look, we've got this guy Oliver. He's 18 years old. We've just found him in a car park, essentially sleeping rough in his car. His parents have thrown him out. Have you got a room for him? And at the time, I was kind of how do we put this in the nicest possible way? I was pimping out low-end rooms in the council estates that I grew up in, you know, real low-end, £85 box beds, you know, put to self-assembly furniture, and getting these rooms out for 65, 75, £85 a week. So we were at the low end of HMOs. Boutique HMOs came along a few years later. And in my infinite wisdom, I thought, well, of course, he's homeless. I've got spare rooms. The least I can do is bring him in. And indeed, I put him into a professional household, professional HMO, full of IT staff that worked here at Tata Technologies. And the whole thing was a real mess. So that was my first lesson in how do you de-risk the opportunity to make an impact. In fact, that was my second experience. My first experience was giving all my money away, volunteering for the UN in Rwanda, but that's a story for a different day. So number one, de-risking. Number two, building long-term sustainable partnerships. And that, I think, is the bit that I've always had right from the beginning. So I work very closely with the homelessness team here at the local council and others across the country. We work very closely with Shelter. We work closely with NGOs and charities that deal in emergency housing and domestic abuse, victims, essentially. We work very closely with the new refugee and asylum seeker resettlement teams. Through my work at the UK constabularies between kind of 2003 and 2008, I also have close relationships with people at the Home Office that kind of oversee this world. Now, I'm not suggesting that you need all of those relationships, but certainly you need the key relationships that are going to help you to create that kind of the triple bottom line win. So before I kind of talk about that triple bottom line, just give me an indication in the chat box. Number one, are you in social housing? Yes or no. Number two, have you considered getting into social housing? Yes or no. And number three, do you have a portfolio? Yes or no, essentially. So three questions. Are you in social housing? Yes or no. Have you considered it? Yes or no. And do you have an existing portfolio, or are you fairly new to this, the whole world of property investment? Okay, so fantastic. So essentially, by the looks of it, certainly from the people that have responded, we're really talking to people who have, the majority of you have some assets, you're not in social housing, and you're looking to maybe convert part or all of your portfolio to a social housing portfolio. Would that be about right? Why in the chat box if that's about right? Because that really determines what you and I talk about. Fantastic. Fantastic. All right. So essentially, it's exactly the same pathway that I followed. So back in 2011, I remember having a conversation with my dad. We were converting one of these family homes in the council estates that I grew up, and I'm pointing at the ceiling because I remember vividly putting these linked smoke detectors into this fairly low-end HMO, and I couldn't afford to get tradesmen. So this was not, this is a dodgy landlord. This is a guy that wants to make a difference, wants to house people that need housing, but just has got no money. Is £106,000 in debt. I'd just come back from a volunteering mission in Rwanda that basically essentially nearly bankrupted me. I kind of guilt and shame caused me to give all this money away. For any of you that are interested in the energetics of money, guilt and shame can do some really crazy things. And so I remember having a conversation with my dad saying, like, this is bizarre. How can the son of a refugee family take control of an asset worth £100,000 with no income, £100,000 in debt, and start cash flow? It didn't make sense to me. I'd studied economics and sociology at university, so I had this whole kind of concept of the lords and the serfs, the landowners and essentially the workers. And most of us, I dare say, would fall firmly in the serfs camp, right? There are very few of us in the room today who would fall into the lords camp. So we've all had to be self-made. I remember saying to my dad, from an economics perspective, surely the tax and policy regime will force small landlords out of the market. Surely that's going to happen, because how can upstarts like me take control of this asset? One in the chat box if you're following along, and if you've had those same thoughts and actually are experiencing exactly that right now. Oh, is that Neil and Jackie Dobson? How are we? Fantastic to see you there. Dream team. If you don't know who Neil and Jackie Dobson are, definitely connect with them. Anyway, I diverge. And so I was like, surely tax regimes, policy around lettings, around purchasing of properties, around stamp duty, around environmental protection, surely that's going to squeeze small landlords, accidental landlords out of the market. And then looking long term, again, with my economist's hat on, we were already starting to see in the early 2010s, so before and around the time of the Eurozone crisis, we already started to see huge institutional investment in residential real estate. Of course, everybody knows about it now. Everybody knows that in 2019, BlackRock were investing $100 million a month in the US into residential landlord. But when you looked at money flows and when you looked at portfolio holdings of some of these huge funds, you started to see the beginnings of institutional investment in residential real estate. Now we know John Lewis are buying properties, Lloyds Bank are buying properties, Halifax, but everyone's buying real estate, right? So I said to my dad, I think what we need to do with our property strategy is exactly what we do with everything else that we are involved in, whether that's me working in the public sector, trying to make a difference there, or whether my dad working for the police, whatever it was. We always had kind of this idea of the triple bottom line. And I'd first heard about that term from a lady called Jacqueline Novogratz, who I was fortunate enough to meet around about a decade or so after I had this conversation with my dad. But she set up Acumen, which is the biggest impact investment fund in the world. She's insane. She's amazing. And so I've got the chat box here, so I was just getting distracted by that audio. I'm checking, my internet is really strong. I've got most things shut down in the background. So if you're having struggle with audio, let me just double check that things are closed down. It might be worth just closing everything down in the background. Gim, can you?
It's all good. Yeah, it's all good, Dillon. We can hear you fine. Yeah.
All right. All right. Fantastic. Thank you. Sorry for the distraction. All right. So essentially, we wanted to focus on the triple bottom line. When you focus on the triple bottom line, you make yourself indispensable to local housing needs, indispensable to your partners, and essentially indispensable to the broader private lettings market. And what I mean by that is you can't get pushed out. So what is the triple bottom line? It's income, impact, and influence. And in the social housing context, what we're really talking about here is creating income that is greater than private rental rates. And of course, at the moment, to be fair, at the lower end of social housing, which is the end that we're at, 80% of our portfolio is at the lower end. Actually, that's not quite as easy to do as it was 5 years ago. So to give you an example, at the moment, we will let out a 3-bedroom on the private market. We just had one go out at 1150 a month to, funnily enough, a serviced accommodation provider. But that's the market rate. And our housing allowance rate for a 4-bed is 899 here in Peterborough. So what I'm getting at here is you want to be broad in your thinking around income. You want it ideally greater than the private rental sector, and that is available at the slightly more complex end of social housing, and I'll talk about the spectrum in a second. Or you want it as hands-free as possible. Now, I'm not talking about hands-free from the big marketing hyperbole end. I'm talking about hands-free, genuine hands-free, where you can lease your property out. So we lease our properties out to local council, to housing associations and charities on 60-month tenancies, and we set the criteria for those. And again, this is about being indispensable in the marketplace. When you're a respected landlord, you've got much more control how you negotiate these contracts. And so we set the parameters in accordance with what we know is affordable and what we know the council will pay anyway. But in terms of specifications around maintenance, so we just had a 4-bedroom property handed back to us, and it had a new kitchen, a new wet room, new bathroom, new internal fire doors, all new carpeting, and essentially was handed back to us after a 5-year period, much better than the condition that we'd given it in. And that was part of the contract, and that they were happy with that. We were definitely happy with that. We wrote that into the contract. So think about income in the much broader context. Yes, it's about cash flow, but it's also about the two words that I kind of like to infuse in all my kind of business and commercial dealings: peace and ease. I want to be able to sleep at night, and I want the process to be easy. I want my partners to be easy to deal with. I want the relationship to be easy to manage. I want the whole deal to be easy and peaceful to negotiate. Give me a one in the chat box if you resonate with those two words, because not everybody does. You know, quite a lot of my peers absolutely love the hustle, the grind, and the mayhem and the chaos of property investment, and that's definitely not for me. I've been threatened with baseball bats around my head by tenants that have locked themselves out of their room far too often at the beginning of my property investment career to ever want that chaos again. So peace and ease are two teachings from the Buddha that I just like to infuse in everything. So income can be peaceful, it can be easy to negotiate, and it can be sustainable, it can be hands-free, and it can be greater than the private rental market, more guaranteed than the private rental market, or at least over a 5-year period when you've got no voids and all your maintenance is taken care of, and you get the property back in a better state than which you'd given it. Obviously that nets you, and that netted us around about, in terms of the voids that we missed out, was around about 10 to 12,000 pounds over the 5 years. The refurbishment work that spent between 40 and 60,000 pounds on, so that was essentially an unquantifiable net gain of around about 70 to 80,000 pounds over a 5-year period, which, when you start adding these numbers up across a portfolio, you start to really benefit. So social housing is, yes, about a 60-month lease and hands-free income. Of course it is. But when I'm thinking about income, I'm looking at this in the same way as I just did the calculations on our new 5-year fixed rate. I'm looking at what the 5-year net gain is as compared to any other alternative deployment of that asset. This is about sweating the asset, but not sweating the body, right? Next, impact. By the way, it doesn't matter which of these three you prioritize. For some of us, it's income. And in my earliest days, £106,000 in debt, trading my last £5,000 credit card allowance. It was an MB&A check that I wrote to myself, put that in the markets, trading that to try and meet some of these minimum payments and try and pay that 100 grand off, sticking lipsticks onto Cosmopolitan magazine at the Piecework warehouse up the road from my mum's, where I was now living, having rented my room out because I heard a speaker talking about test adverts on Spare Room and HMOs and room demand. So I went to a property event and set up this test advert on Spare. I'm the kind of guy that just does things straight away. Set up this advert on Spare Room, taking pictures of my brother's room next door. He's moved to the States. He's at my parents' house. By the next morning, I've got like 16 inquiries. So of course I'm going to rent my bedroom out at £85 a week. So what I'm getting at here is, and then I rented my brother's out and then moved into my sister's room. By the way, she lived in London, so it wasn't one of those weird Peterborough relationships at all. Get that thought out of your mind. Anyway, so my point is, it started with income at the beginning, but the inspiration was always impact, not even influence. I didn't believe myself big enough or important enough or smart enough to have any kind of influence. But I remember at around the age of 13 or 14, like 3rd or 4th year senior, for those of you old enough to remember proper year numbers at school. By the looks of you, you're all bloody old enough to remember those proper numbers. Some of you are old enough to remember O-levels, I would have thought. Anyway, yeah, hello, yes. So essentially, we went down to East Iningledale, near just outside of Bristol, for those of you that know the Southwest, stunning part of the world. Anyway, we'd gone to see a couple, Keith and Elizabeth Townend. It wasn't the first time we'd gone to see them, but it was the first time I can actually remember going to see them. Hey, Si. And Keith and Elizabeth Townend were the angels, the divine beings that met my mother and father at West Malling Army Camp as they'd arrived in as refugees in 1972 from East Africa. Some of you look of Asian origin, so no doubt you'll have family that has this history, and others have surnames that I can see will have a connection to immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. So, there's many of us in the room here that absolutely get this viscerally. And they took my parents in and my younger brother, older brother, who was 2 years older at the time. And every time I'd go and see Keith, the one thing I'd remember is the story that he told. In fact, it's the opening of my TED talk, which was, October the 27th, 1972, a family of 3 arrive in England, dad's still in short sleeve shirts, etc., etc., etc. Now, the point here is, at that point, and this is why I remember that particular meeting so viscerally, I remember at that point thinking, I want to be like Keith one day. I want to be like Keith one day. Like, I want to be that man. They'd adopted, fostered 6 children. They couldn't have children of their own. Oh, fuck me, excuse my language. Be careful what you wish for, by the way. I nearly was the dad who had to adopt and foster. It took us 3 years to have Bodhi in our life. So yeah, I just had a thought, be careful what you manifest. But I thought at that time, I want to be Keith. And I want to do what he's doing. And imagine one day being at the front of the queue when people in need have got challenges of housing. And of course, I didn't articulate it in this way. It was just, I want to be like Keith. But this just allowed this to percolate over the years. And even at university, it was always about some kind of property portfolio, some kind of real impact. So the impact bottom line is that you are able to house, put a roof over their heads. For those of you that know the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, get people above that survival threshold, have an impact on their lives, break the cycle of poverty quite often by providing people with shelter, yet without any of the headache and heartache of actually housing the tenants yourself, as I had with Oliver, because of course there came a time when I had to evict Oliver. And whilst we didn't Section 21 him, and we didn't actually evict him, he paid no rent other than what the homeless charity had paid us, which was the first month and the deposit. Oliver paid no rent. He disrupted the house, so other tenants left. I could see perhaps why his dad didn't want to live with him, although, I didn't quite understand it at the time. Anyway, so my point is that it was heartbreaking having to get Oliver out of that. Thank you so much, RP. Having to get Oliver out of that house, right? Out of our asset, because we're not a charity. So you get to have the impact without the heartache and the headache. And that for me is huge. Just a side story, if I might. The first family that we took in properly, i.e. leasing to the council for 5 years, was basically at the beginning of the Syrian refugee crisis. I don't know if you remember when there was a central government mandate to local governments to house a certain number of Syrian families. Hasn't happened with the Afghanistan exodus, hasn't happened with the Ukraine exodus, hasn't happened with others, but did happen with Syria. We took in a family, 2 sons, a mum and a dad, and the daughter. Dad, real severe back pain, can't work. Mother looking after 3 children. I don't know how any mother looks after any more than 1 child. I think looking after 1 child is a 3-man job, mum, dad, and a nanny. So how she's looking after 3 kids below the age of 10, I've got no idea. And there was this girl, this daughter, this amazing young woman, 10 years old at the time, only one in the family that spoke English, only one in the family that was essentially educated and old enough to go to school. And I remember at that time thinking, crikey, you are something else. You are something special. And we essentially, they were in our 3-bed, one of our 3-bed properties. What really pushed me back into this space in a big way, I take the Buffett approach to investment. When people are flooding into the market, I sit back. So since 2013-14, all I've done is built cash reserves to execute on our lease options, all of which that had been agreed 2011, 12, 13. And as prices started rising, we only took on the very, very best deals. It wasn't a massive kind of escalation and increase in our portfolio size. That time is now. And so one of the reasons I've kind of decided to get back into this space as an investor in such a large way is looking at the stories of our families and looking at the story of just this one individual who has now got a place at Edinburgh University to study architecture. She's broken the cycle for her family. She's inspiring her brothers in ways that could never have been possible Had we not got her the place at the local secondary school, had we not, although we don't house our families, we take quite a kind of a close sense of responsibility over them. We check in on them, we make sure that they're all right. Everything outside of their housing needs, which we don't deal with, contractually we don't deal with, we try and do our best to deal with. So this is where impact is just such a fulfilling and rewarding aspect of our work as social housing providers. And then thirdly, influence. This is the bit that I never thought I was good enough to do. It was the bit that I remember being in The Hague, and essentially I was at the head offices of an American NGO that were operating in Rwanda. And I'd been in Africa since 2008, 2011, just after my work with the UK Police Service. And I kind of, as an economist, I couldn't understand this whole reliance on aid. Of course, we now understand it's all part of the capitalist regime. But I remember going to this, the head offices of this aid agency and showing them my economic blueprint for trade, not aid. You know, this is what we need to do. Forget the fish, forget the fishing rod. Show people how to add value to fish and build markets for fish. And therefore, you don't ever have to raise another penny of charitable aid again. Oh, Mr. Dhanecha, we're in the business of aid and you clearly don't understand. And that really destroyed my confidence. So I never thought I was good enough to make a long-term lasting influence on anything. But being a respected social housing provider that essentially sits between the people who manage and lease the properties and the actual service users, you get this beautiful view of the market, because you're not the people that the council go to complain because the houses are falling apart. You're not the people that the tenants go to complain because the houses are falling apart. And there's an interesting dynamic about our refugee and asylum seeker tenants. They maintain our properties to a standard that I have never seen before. So when we're talking about houses falling apart, I'm talking about a dripping tap that becomes such an emergency because they want to save the water, they don't want to ruin the tap. It's quite a beautiful thing to see. But essentially, when you're sat in the middle, as you and I are, you get the opportunity to influence the entire space. And you get the opportunity, essentially, if, like me, you're plugged in to the local network, to have an actual impact on housing policy. And that, for me, long term, is really important. But even this talk, you know, where did this talk came from? I did a post on Facebook when I saw the shelter advert that said 131,000 children will be homeless this Christmas. And I just kind of did a post that said, this breaks my heart. And as somebody that's got the skills, the experience, the knowledge, the wins and the losses in this space, I need to be out there sharing with more landlords, with more investors, how to get into this space. Because I think collectively, for those of us that really give a shit, collectively, we can not only generate huge income, but actually we start to have an impact and an influence on, you know, what I see as the lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. From my role as a spiritual teacher, how can we ever get a species self-actualizing? How could you ever self-actualize your fullest potential if you're struggling to put food on the table and, you know, you're living under a tarpaulin on a road? All right, it's not Mumbai, but fuck me, some places in Peterborough look like the streets of Mumbai, with families and refugees and asylum seekers and homeless individuals living under tarpaulin. It's nuts, right? So income, impact, influence. And Norman, no man, Said, hopefully I've pronounced that right. You raise a good point, and it's not a point that I want to ignore. You know, what about the flip side and all the dozens or hundreds of people who are not good? So this is a paradigm, and it's an ideological perspective, I have to say, in the sense that my paradigm and my ideological perspective is that at the heart, all humans are good. So I'm a self-taught neurologist. I did a postgrad in behavioral economics. So understanding the human brain and human psychology, and of course my role as a spiritual teacher, understanding the soul, has kind of led me to believe and absolutely hold in my heart that all human beings are fundamentally good. But we are trying to cope with a complex world with a very primitive mind. And the primitive mind is one of survival. I will do whatever I need to do to survive. And it's also one that's prone to addictions, all sorts of addictions, thought addictions, chemical addictions, action addictions. In fact, you and I, we all have addictions, right? So yes, there absolutely there are huge issues around tenants that maybe don't quite look after your property, or we work with a charity that houses ex-offenders, and one of the things that they do, which I love, is tie up the houses. So they're always looking for houses close to churches and in parish councils. So we provide them with those. What they do is link the house up to the parish council so that the tenants get support. So I think all humans are good. And I think that by playing the role in the middle, you insulate yourself from the heartbreak of damage to your property, because you don't automatically equate it to cost, and you don't automatically equate it to your baby being destroyed. It's just part and parcel of what you do. And you've built into the leases and the contracts the terms on which the property will be handed back to you. So number one, it's a paradigm and it's an ideology. All people are good. On that basis, we do have to mitigate risk of getting a property back and it's completely destroyed. So you contract in the repairs and the maintenance. Does that answer the question? And I know that will have been a question on everybody's mind. Number one, if everyone's following with me, yeah. I may be missing something. This will only work if your income is greater than what your costs are. Yeah, totally, Si. As with all property investment and all business, right? Your income has to be greater than your costs. Of course it does. Now, one of the beauties about the social housing space and the way that we structure leases, whether that's at the complex end of supported living or the very basic end of taking on a 4-bedroom family home and giving it to the council for 5 years, the beauty about this space is that because you build in maintenance costs and guaranteed and proper guaranteed rent, I'm not talking about rent to rent guaranteed rent that isn't actually guaranteed. I'm talking about commercial leases where your rent is guaranteed. You start to, as I said, you start to look at income in the main. I just heard a piece on Radio 4 on the way in talking about how they think inflation is going to go back to target rate 2% in April, indicating that the floodgates might open to interest rate reduction. So, but personally, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that is somewhat of an election ploy. I think get people comfortable before a general election. So I don't think we'll see, probably as an economist, I don't think we'll see lower than 4.75 by the end of the year. But what I'm getting at here is I've just fixed for 5 years at 5.85. 5 years at 5.85, and that seems inordinately high. Why would you do that, Dillon, if interest rates are going to go down, which they will? For me, it's about fixed costs and fixed income. So I love this sector, and I love the way that we operate in this sector and how you could operate in this sector, because you're running a business on fixed cost and fixed income. And if you can do that and your yield, or for me, my cash on cash return hits my target of between 9 and 12%, then happy days, right? Si, does that answer the question? It absolutely is about costs being less than income, but it's also about looking at your income in the main and looking at how you want to run the business. If you want to run it variable costs and variable income and voids and maintenance and that chaotic end of landlording, then social housing isn't for you. And I know that that's nonsense. This is like flippant comment, right? I know it is for everybody, because we want the calm, we want the peace, we want the ease, and we want, as far as we can, fixed cost and fixed income. So where do your charities get the money from? We tried a few. Rita, thank you so much. By the way, but drop your questions in. I'm quite fluid in my talk. I want to make sure that you get something from this, and we'll cover all the bits that I've promised Guillaume that we'll cover. But do get the questions in as they come, right? All right, so we've tried a few times to work with a local homeless charity, but the maximum they could give us was 75% of LHA rates, which just doesn't work for us in terms of cash flow. My humanitarian and religious background still drive me to ultimately provide housing for vulnerable parts of the society. I love you to pieces already. Elderly, single-parent families, women fleeing domestic abuse, huge underserved sector that is. But currently struggling to see how to make it work number-wise. So, look, this is where so many social housing providers come into the space, because we come into the space from a place of wanting to make an impact. And our conditioning, I'm not even going to call it morals or religion or spirituality, it's conditioning and program, isn't it? That we often take the lose-win situation. So we'll be at the losing end and the service user will be at the winning end, whether that's us giving too much money to charities, or whether that's us giving too much time and attention to our students and our clients, or whether that's us giving way more than we can afford to give in time, money, energy, and love. We do it, right? Because that's our conditioning. So I'm not going to suggest it's an easy fix. And some of these charities you will need to walk away from. Or what you do is work with the charities. So funnily enough, ironic how all of this stuff comes together. My official job for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa was to work with NGOs and charities, filling in their strategic operational pro formas to go and raise money from aid agencies. So what I will do if I see a charity like that, and one of the homeless shelters that my dad volunteers for that we then got in with have had this exact same problem. So what we help them to do is apply for the necessary grants, and we have a database of grants available so that they can get that money, and that then they can afford the rent, or they can afford to, you know, uplift their premises or whatever. Now look, here is the crux of what I'm talking about. You have to, and this kind of helps us to elegantly slip into the social housing, essentially, strategy matrix. You have to decide how much time you want to put into this, how much capital you have to put into this, and whether or not you're converting a portfolio or you're starting from scratch. So essentially, the time, capital, and your portfolio, your existing portfolio size. These are the three things that will determine where you go in the marketplace. And that really is your starting point. So Rita, I completely, I feel your pain. I've been there in exactly that same spot before, where we really want to help. We really want to house a family or an ex-offender, or, you know, a victim of domestic abuse and her children. And it's heartbreaking when you can't do it from a financial perspective. But there are ways in which longer term, and I come back to that third bottom line win of influence, longer term, you can. But it really depends on how much time you want to put into this. Some people don't want to put any time in, haven't got any capital, haven't got any portfolios at all. And I know that that's not you guys, but those individuals, which was essentially me, you know, I'm working in a factory, I haven't got any capital, I've got no portfolio. So I had to get my properties on a lease option, which of course Property Filter now makes it so much easier to do. I get my properties on a lease option and then rent them to the council and make sure everybody in that chain, from the blender to the vendor to us to the council to the housing, so everyone was happy with that arrangement. So there's some front end time that goes in, but for us, once they're given away, they're given away. And then as I start to free up my time, then I can start really working on some of these more complex issues around the sector in itself. So the short answer is walk away. The long answer is understand where you want to put your time and how you as a human being can make the greatest possible impact. For me, giving all my money away in Rwanda and I hitchhiked back across the Rwanda-Kenya border, had no money for an internal flight. The fucking irony, I'd come from a consulting background and had my first class British Airways ticket from Nairobi. I turn up to the first class lounge in Nairobi, like looking bedraggled, having taken like a 4-day journey from Kigali to Nairobi. It's awful. Anyway, my point is that giving all my money away gave me a feel-good factor in the moment, which I now understand to have been driven, you know, through blockages in my core, my solar plexus, and kind of, you know, confidence and worthiness issues. But it didn't solve any problems long term. So we have to decide where we want to put our time and get creative around how we can help these organizations on a much more longer term basis. So the book that is coming out next year, Abundance, is essentially going to be affiliated to a charity, and the proceeds of the book will go to that charity. So just a small thing that I can do, not so we can take the rent from them, but essentially to support the space. Does that answer the question, Rita? Absolutely right, Darren. One of the reasons that, so again, not to kind of veer into geopolitics, but how can we not, in the world that we live in right now, today, right? Everything we turn on is geopolitics. But yeah, well, absolutely. One of the reasons that this kind of offensive against the Houthis has taken on such priority is Western economies wanting to avoid further inflationary pressure and actually going into more than technical recession. I agree, absolutely. So yes, fixed income, fixed profits, fixed income, fixed costs, absolutely paramount. Okay, so Joe, let's get to the mechanics of this. So I do have I've got a process, SOCIAL, social. How do you get started? So look, the first thing you have to decide, Joe, the S, is the strategy. And how do you want to serve? Because once you understand that, then you get who do you need to contact. If I was in your position, I wanted to get it done really, really quickly, I would immediately, what council area are you in, Joe? I've probably got the contact of the person you need to speak to somewhere. We've got a huge database of social housing providers, all the council contacts. This is how we get our properties out so quickly. Bristol. So Joe, I would contact the refugee and asylum seeker manager, like the redeployment officer, it might be called. And I would ask them if they need family homes. Most of them do. However, a lot of councils this last 12 to 18 months have also been given massive budgets to go and buy these properties. That's not going to last. Where are they going to get infinite sums of money to go and buy properties? So in fact, the house that we got handed back to us was, funnily enough, the first one I did as a lease option. So the whole thing came full circle. They wanted to purchase for 180. I suggested 220. They agreed 220. By the way, the trick is to play the game of fear and greed through the filter of love and abundance. So it doesn't mean you have to take the hit, but you just negotiate in a way that's very loving and abundant in nature, and that comes back to you. But essentially they agreed 220. And then they sent this surveyor's report, which wanted a £10,000 reduction. And I just didn't think that was fair to agree a price and then whatever. So we pulled out of the sale. We've now rented that to a care company who are housing care staff. So again, just a slightly different strategy, still a 60-month tenancy. So I would contact, number one, the Refugee and Asylum Settler Programme officer at your local council. If you've got no joy there, I would contact social services for emergency housing, see if they've got any needs. If you've got no joy there, I would contact housing associations. And by the way, I'll do them in this order because the council is the easiest to work with. So housing associations get a little bit more complex. And so that would be my top 3 hit list. Social services to see if they have a requirement for emergency housing and who the right person would be to speak to about emergency housing. Quite often the emergency housing contacts aren't published. The refugee and asylum seeker resettlement officer at the local council. If you can't get them by name, reach out to me. I might have the contact details and I can do an introduction. Or you go through a roundabout fashion and do it through the empty homes officer. So contact the empty homes officer or the head of the homelessness team. Now, all of this I've kind of figured out, not by sitting down and deciding how do you set up a process, but by reverse engineering how we develop these relationships. And it was working with and being known to all the key people that afforded me the opportunity to build these relationships. So here's the thing. When I first started in property, I didn't do what we're taught to do, which was to traipse up and down the high street, building relationships with estate agents. That is not what I wanted to do, because number one, that wouldn't have made us as you know, indispensable. And number two, it's just a very long way of going around finding deals, right? If I'm going to traipse up and down the high street, I'll do that with my bright yellow Micra, and I'll do that posting leaflets and all sorts. I did have the bag here. Actually, yeah, this is when we first started. Like, this is, I'm talking from 2011. So these strategies don't really work now, and Property Filter has kind of got rid of the need for these. But you know, this was us back in the day. My wife and I, my wife had a, my now wife had a full-time job. I was working in the warehouse. In all spare time, we'd be doing this kind of nonsense. But the other thing I did do was think about how best to get the deals. And it wasn't through estate agents. In those days, it was through empty homes officers. And that was my first point of call to the council. And then I realized how powerful that was. So, Joe, what I'm getting at here is the thing that we must do, yes, is decide our strategy and then start building the networks. And so many people get put off by social housing and entering this space because all of a sudden it just seems so much harder. But this front end work is going to allow you to have a very hands-free experience of being a landlord, being a property investor. And what does that allow you to do? Allows you to grow your portfolio. So rather than having this very hands-on approach, even managing agents, dealing with agents, pushing agents, agents are supposed to make our lives easier. But how many times have you had an agent that has been really proactive in ensuring no voids? Like, I have to be on my agent's cases for the handful of properties that we've got in the private rental market to make sure that there's no voids, to make sure we're at the top of the list, to make sure that they're doing what they need to do. Whereas on the social housing side, I can dedicate my time to supporting the families. That's just something I like doing, but also in growing the portfolio, in sharing knowledge. Give me one in the chat box if that makes sense. It's like you either put the time and effort in at the front end and then have an easy life of it, or find the deal, find the money, get it let out through a letting agency, and then begins the fucking nightmare of being a landlord and a property investor. And excuse my language, but it can be that frustrating, right? It can be like, I thought this was going to be much easier. And then you start getting hit with tax regime changes, and then we start getting hit with all these kind of rules and regulations and shifts on the playing field. And you didn't set up your portfolio in line with these new rules. How could you have? Whereas for us, for example, as EPC regulations, if they come in to the extent that they're going to come in, we've negotiated that anybody that's in a 60-month tenancy, if they've got more than half of that tenancy left, they will be responsible for bringing those properties up to scratch. Now, I've been told by a lot of the housing associations that we partner with that they'll do the work anyway because they've already factored it in. So, yeah, understand the strategy, build the networks. And this is where you, as somebody who is prepared to put some time and effort in at the front end, can enter a market that other investors are put off by immediately they hear this conversation. And that's why I didn't want to start with, guaranteed rent, give it away and happy days. There's some challenges to get started. One of the reasons we built a whole database of providers and council officers that we need to contact, etc., 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 is because that's where the value is in the business. Once we've got a property, or once our tenants have got properties, we know who to send them out to get those properties let out. All 100 properties leased via councils, beautiful. So you go via an agent to councils, we go direct to the council. So do you have any other agent to use? I'm trying to diversify. So what are you looking for? A commercial leasing agent, a housing provider, a Serco type organization? I'm just not completely clear on the question. Great question, Darcel. So we've built our own database. We've essentially built our own database of people. And here's the beauty. When you set up your actual kind of asset as a hands-free investment, you've now got time to go and do the legwork that is connecting with charities. Like we just connected with Shelter through that single Facebook post that they did about homeless children. And they connected us to our local Shelter chapter, and we're now working with them to provide emergency housing. All of that since December. So it can happen really very quickly. And this is why you can come in anywhere, income, impact, or influence, and you'll always get the triple bottom line. That's the design of the niche. But actually, if you've not got the heart for it, I wouldn't bother. Because when you go and speak to these charities, the housing associations, not so much, but the NGOs and certainly the council officers, they will spot, essentially a hardcore capitalist a mile off, and then we will be painted with that same paintbrush that Shelter up until now has been painting private sector landlords with, that we're all charlatans, we're all crooks, and we don't give a shit about our tenants, right? But actually, that's not true. There are a handful like that, but that's not us. So my point, broader point here is, like, really get tapped into which part of the vulnerable population you want to serve. Is it domestic abuse victims? Is it emergency housing? Is it ex-offenders? Is it supported living? Is it, what is it, refugees and asylum seekers? Decide where you want to be in the marketplace to start with, and then understand who are the big players in that place, in your region, and then start doing the work. Now, if you're novice, and I know that some of you are newbies with no portfolio, then you can be building your deal pipeline using Property Filter, which is fantastic in terms of return on your time, and doing exactly what I did, by the way. We were posting leaflets and contacting council members, or rather council officers and NGOs and charities, and then being put in touch. So just a contact at the food bank put us in touch with the charity that houses ex-offenders near churches. So you do have to have the heart for it. But when you know that you're in it for income, impact, and influence, you can throw all the heart you want into it, because you know it's not wasted. You know, when I was giving money away in Rwanda, that wasn't serving me at all in my long-term financial future at all. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sharon. That's the actual link. Very grateful indeed. Do councils have specific areas, and do you require specialist BTL lender? Really good point. So for us, I mean, our lenders are the standard, you know, Shawbrook, Paragon, Bright, I think it's Bright, and a handful of other names that you would recognize. They're all mainstream lenders. We just make sure that they are okay at the beginning of the application. We make sure that they're okay with essentially a 60-month commercial tenancy. Now, interestingly, whilst they're all right with it, some of them specified that it can't be more than a 62-month tenancy, or if it's going to be a commercial, there's some requirements, but generally a 60-month tenancy to a social housing provider, to a charity, essentially is regarded in a similar way to if you are, you know, housing an LHA tenant. So you do require a specialist lender that does commercial finance, buy-to-let finance, but it's not a specialist lender that does social housing lending. That's not what you need. Now, again, when you think about, so part of what I'm going to take you through are the funding options on the masterclass. But when you think about funding, sometimes in this sector and in this space, it's very useful, and I would never, but I'm about to. It's very useful to have solid relationships with bridging providers, because quite often, you know, things have to move so quickly that you need essentially to do a purchase in cash using a bridge, then give it out to the leaseor, if you like, and then go back and figure out the finance. So essentially refinance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And again, you build this into your 5-year cost benefit analysis. You build this into your 5-year P&L. You build this into your long-term asset and investment strategy. So it might not necessarily be about the specific lender, but it might be about the specific funding avenue you choose to go down. And quite often, you know, we have a lender that can do 100% on a bridge. It's not always the case that it's the best form of funding, because they'll take a percentage, and it's a very expensive way of doing it. But if we're using that on a big property that we know will pay us back, that, you know, within the first 12 months, we've got payback on all of our incoming costs, our legals, our borrowing costs, the whole lot, then I'm going to do it. Does that answer your question, Hesh? Yeah, again, I think, Zishan, it's a really good question. So are there any opportunities with councils, housing associations, etc., where social housing properties can get market rates or above LHA rates? Many landlords are put off by the fact that councils only provide LHA rates. I think I go back to my opening point here, which is if you look at income over a 5-year period, which is the period of an average lease, an average tenancy, if you like, and you look at actually what your net gain is by being paid guaranteed LHA rates, I think many landlords will find that they're mistaken in being put off. Give me one in the chat box if you're following through with that, if you've been here since the beginning. It's this idea that you can't just look at what they pay me 899 on a 4-bed. In fact, on a lot of ours, we negotiate £50 above, so 949. But say they pay me 899 on a 4-bed, and I can get 1100 or 1200 on a 4-bed, or even 1300 on a 4-bed in the private rental sector. Actually, number one, how many voids might I experience through that 5-year period? Number two, the economic climate that we're in and have been in for the last 5 or 6 years, essentially at that LHA rate in a private sector market. So if I'm giving my property out to an LHA tenant and getting LHA rates, that's a very different proposition to giving my property to the council for 5 years, 60 months, and getting LHA rates. That's the distinction I'm trying to draw here. So yes, I would be put off too by getting LHA rates, having a tenant paying me LHA rates, because that comes with all the complications and the chaos of landlording, but you're getting less than market rent. And sometimes you might not get the rent because you're not getting direct payment and so on and so forth, but that's a different story. But actually getting LHA rates guaranteed for 60 months, knowing that your property will be handed back in the same or better condition than that which you gave it in, and usually it's better because bathrooms and kitchens all deteriorate, and it's easy for the council to allocate their maintenance people to go and install a new bathroom and kitchen. Like, the people don't give a shit about actually what's being spent on these properties. You, in your right mind, would never have spent £60,000 on essentially a Howden's kitchen, a tiny little wet room, and a bathroom with plain white ceramic suite, correct? And you just wouldn't have done it because you would have had some nous about you. But the person authorising that spend of the council doesn't care. So my point is that look at it in the whole. Look at it in the whole. Really important to look at this in the whole and say, actually, let me do the numbers properly. I'm getting £950 for a 4-bed. I could get 1,200, 1,100, £1,300 on the private rental market, sure. Out of that, I've got 10% plus VAT fees. I've probably got 8 to 10 to 12% in maintenance costs. I need to figure out gas certs. I need to figure out EPCs. I need to figure out all those things, fire alarm checks, all of that stuff. I'm probably going to have some voids, and I'm going to have some heartache along the way. And I'm probably going to have, at the end of 5 years, a capital investment to make of at least 10, 15, 20,000 pounds, because I'm going to need to replace bathrooms, kitchens, boilers, etc. This is really critical. And so often I meet investors and landlords that just don't think, I'm not suggesting this is you, but just don't think strategically enough. And these aren't, by the way, investors like yourselves that turn up and spend an hour on a session like these. These are the individuals that get put off by those headline rates. Yeah. Thumbs up if that makes sense. Had a lot of ones in the chat box. Thumbs up if that makes sense. Yeah, it's that broader context. Guillaume, by the way, is this what you need? Is this what you expected? Is there anything else I need to do here to make sure your people are served? It's really important to me.
Yeah, thank you very much. You mentioned about the matrix. I think I'm quite curious myself about the matrix. If you can go into the detail on that, that'd be really cool. And thanks for taking the question as they came, you made it quite interactive, so we don't have a backlog of questions at the end, so it's all fine. So cool, yeah, money matrix, and then you talk about like opportunities 2024, 2026, into know a bit more about that.
Sorry, just repeat that. I was distracted by a question. Sorry, Guillaume, let me listen to you.
Yeah, you had on the agenda, we had the matrix, and
yes,
also opportunities in 2024 and
yes,
up to 2026 in the near future, basically.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for bringing that back to me. Okay, so the matrix itself, you want to think about this as that kind of the X, Y, and Z axis of how much time you want to put into this, how much capital you have, and what size is your portfolio and what state is your portfolio in. That will then set for you where you want to be on the spectrum from simple to complex. So simple is 4-bed house given to the council, 60 months tenancy, usually as part of their refugee and asylum seeker resettlement program. That's where it usually ends up. Slightly more complex than that is having similar properties, 3 and 4 bedroom properties, that you work with emergency housing providers with, and they're given away, they're essentially rented to the emergency, at least to the emergency housing provider. The contracts are slightly different. The maintenance requirements on those are quite often joint, because quite often the houses aren't in constant use all the time, which is bizarre when you think about it, because you've got people in Premier Inns and flipping, what's the other one, the Travelodge. So the contracts are slightly more complex with those. And then at the really complex end, which is where we're at right now, is kind of building to order. So what do councils, housing associations, charities, NGOs need in terms of housing, their housing stock for the next 36, 60, 120 months? And how can we build essentially to order? Now, the reason that's much more complex is that for those, we're looking at 10-year, 25-year leases in the same way as you would leasing out a coffee shop to Costa or a building to a bank. Yeah, non-government organizations, Clive, sorry to throw that jargon in. So an NGO is a non-government organization. Think about it like a kind of a cross between a public body and a charity, essentially. So yeah, essentially that. So that's the matrix. You want to think about this, that it goes from the least complex to the most complex. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say experience is what you need at all to get into the complex end. I mean, you can get into this sector and immediately go in and build to order, essentially. But time, capital, and existing portfolio are going to play into that. For those of you that have got some time, maybe not a lot of time, no capital, but you've got a portfolio, then I would be looking at housing associations and councils at this kind of least complex end as a first stop. As a first stop to say, okay, let me just at least get this portfolio, or as much of it as possible, leased out, so that now I've just bought back some time. I've got some guaranteed income that I might then be able to use to refinance the portfolio sum. And now I can start thinking about the more complex end. So the matrix is essentially a discussion you have, and I can show you the question. I think we've got like something like 60 questions, 50 or 60 questions that lead to the strategy. Essentially is how much time, how much capital, and what's your existing portfolio size. Now, capital doesn't have to be your own capital, remember. So we work with investors, minimum in of £200,000. We work with 10 investors at any one time. So, you know, once we've got 10, there's a waiting list, essentially. I think there's a waiting list about 6 or 7 at the moment. And we'll do one particular deal with each of those. So it's £200,000 minimum in. And rather than essentially, you know, bulking all investor money into one big deal, we'll do 10 individual projects. I'm a program manager by trade, if you like. So we'll do 10 individual projects. So you could set something up that's very, very similar. You could go and look for, do the networking, essentially. And instead of, I'm not going to suggest it because I'm speaking at a lot of property networking meets over the next 6 to 9 months. So I'm definitely not going to suggest don't waste your time at property networking meets. And if you're a host, then definitely get to the host summit and Saj's property networking meet next Thursday. But what I'm saying is be more strategic with your networking in the space. Property networking meets are fantastic. However, for this purpose, you need to be meeting other individuals. Yeah. And then the next thing, the big opportunities. So I think, so again, I think in the introduction text to this, either this meet or my talk at the property summit next week. Now, I've been talking about, from an economist's perspective and a sociologist's perspective, the mass migration of human beings from, to use a colloquialism, shit parts of the world to perceived nice parts of the world. I've been talking about that for 10 or 12 years. In fact, we bought hundreds of acres of land that we can't build on, but that have got services, in the hope of housing refugees and asylum seekers en masse in like amazing campsites. Now, that was like 2012 or 13, just a whimsical plan or a whimsical ploy, but we've got some land bank now. That's never going to happen, by the way. But essentially, I've been talking about this for years, so that's never going to stop. And in fact, the partner of the law firm that took the government to court for this whole Rwanda thing. Now, I've been introduced to him. He's the brother-in-law of one of my cousins. And even if that is approved, the numbers that they're planning to put on a plane are so insignificant that it will have no positive impact on the stress that local councils are facing to house refugees and asylum seekers. And again, look, I don't really care about politics in as much as I don't care what an individual's politics are, but I do care about human beings. And, having heard my dad's story, these guys they might not be the poorest of the poor, but they're some of the most vulnerable people in our country at the time they step foot on this great nation, on this great land. So, that's a population I really want to serve. That's not going to slow down. So refugee, asylum seeker, resettlement programs, they will continue to grow. And again, politics, geopolitics aside, what's happening right now in the Middle East, whatever your views on, not the sides, but whatever your views on, like, who lit the blue touch paper on all that? And how easy is it to distract us in the West from actually crumbling economies by setting off some chain of events in the Middle East to keep that part of the world in turmoil? Again, it's not a discussion for us to have, but I'm just giving you my perspective as an economist, as sociologist, anthropologist, spiritualist. Yeah, I don't think that's going to calm down anytime soon. And I'm absolutely of the firm belief that we will see a greater extent of vulnerable humans coming to the country needing homes and shelter. So refugees and asylum seekers, massive. The other thing that I'm seeing huge growth in is supported living and assisted living for young people. So essentially, two ends of young people housing. It's all the way up to 16, which is you need a house manager, you need social services, you need a license, etc., etc. But then there's this like weird unlicensed sector, 16 to 18, which is young people just aren't supported. So they like turn 16 and off you go. These are like some of the most vulnerable kids in our country. It's nuts. Anyway, so that's the second area. So young people's housing in both aspects of that. So the kind of the care homes essentially for young people up to 16, but then that supported living piece between 16 and 18 as well. I see that as a huge, fundamentally huge opportunity. And then the third area I see is really in kind of the bigger building to order, essentially working with councils and housing associations, not on a specific housing need necessarily. So it's not refugees and asylum seekers, but working with them to say, like, what do you need? Like, is it 3-bedroom homes? Is it 2-bedroom apartments? Is it 37 square foot studios? That's the strategy that we're going for. That's what we see and hear is needed in this area. What is it that you need in terms of housing stock? And what can we build for you specifically to lease to you? Now, let me talk to you about the even bigger opportunity. And it kind of draws us to a close in terms of bringing us full circle to where I started this conversation with my dad back in 2011. We were right. Tax policy has changed dramatically for the worse if you're a small private landlord. And when I say small, I mean not institutional. Yeah. The rules and regulations that we are faced with now are squeezing tons of portfolio holders out. The age of landlords is getting older and older and older. The average age of landlords, I don't know if you've seen that latest statistic, I think something like, I don't know, 70% of rental properties are owned by people over the age of 65 or 70, something nuts like that. So there's a big opportunity here for you as an investor in the next 3, 5, 7 years. And the reason I say 3, 5, and 7, 3 years, I think, is the opportunity for acquisition. 5 years is the opportunity to start actually making that asset as profitable as you can. And then the 7 and 10 year plan, certainly for us as a family fund, if you like, is to then sell out to an institutional investor. So we're building our portfolio big enough and profitable enough goes back to fixed income, fixed costs, etc., etc., etc. We're building it as a business so that then we can sell the entire portfolio to an institutional investor, because I foresee a world where letting agents and estate agents will be the institutional investors. So I see a world where Lloyd's will have their own letting agents for their own properties. I see a world where John Lewis will have a letting agent, the John Lewis letting agent for John Lewis properties. I see that world, and I don't think it's going to be more than 10 or 12 years before we start seeing that. You know, if you've got John Lewis already openly saying we're buying real estate, it's not a leap of the imagination to think that they could put letting agents into their existing retail outlets, the small number that they've got left, right? But they know the retail space. They're now understanding real estate. Like, putting the two together is a very, very simple process. Why would a bank not have its own letting agent if it's got its own lending agent, essentially? And if you think about what, again, going back to lords and serfs, you know, what did the big landowners and the big real estate owners do? So in Stamford, the village just up the road, it's the next village along from us, there's the Burley estate. And when you rent a property in this little village called Stamford, 8 out of 10 times it's a Burley owned property. So 8 out of 10 times you're not going to be dealing with an estate agent in Stamford or letting agents in Stamford. You're going to be dealing directly with the Burley estate. And so I see a world where, as with everything, supermarkets took over corner shops, the big mobile operators swamp up all the small mobile operators, or at least the chips that are serviced by those. You know, everything big swallows up everything small. And we haven't had that consolidation in the real estate market since the days of the lords and serfs, when there was a very clear division: institutional land and real estate owners and everybody else. So the big opportunity for you and I, aside from those social housing opportunities that I spoke to you about, the big opportunity is building a portfolio now that is as hands-free as possible, i.e. you're not dealing with the private rental sector, is as low cost as possible, i.e. you don't have low variable cost as possible, you don't have sporadic voids, sporadic maintenance costs, and essentially is geared up, not leverage, but geared up to be attractive to an institutional investor. And the problem that a lot of landlords have got right now with portfolios, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 portfolios, and this is some of the work I can do from my consulting side, to work with those landlords and do a portfolio analysis and say, look, this is how we take what you've got already and make it sexy for an institutional investor. And we look at which assets we need to dispose of. We look at, you know, how to bring your leverage down, your LTV down, or even how to crank it up if you're really low leverage, crank it up temporarily so that we can go on an expansion spree. But essentially, a lot of landlords now looking to get out of the market or being frustrated in the marketplace are that kind of aging population, if you like, but also didn't ever think about the fact that they might need to sell out to an institutional landlord. Didn't ever really think about capital gains tax impacts on disposing of a portfolio. A lot of people incorporated into limited companies completely falsely. They don't pass the tests for having a limited company, so therefore those assets are being held in a limited company kind of incorrectly. So there's a ton to think about here. And I would say, if you want to take it further, number one, I hope this has been inspirational as well as instructional and has shared some insight. They're the three things I really, triple bottom line, again, really wanted to kind of make sure that that happens. And number two, I would urge you to either join me on the masterclass or go and get some education in this sector, in this space, so you fully understand how to either build a portfolio in order to service the need, in order to scale and sell out to an institutional investor. And that's my roadmap for all of my students and all of my mentees. It's selling out to a big buyer. So we start thinking about tax implications from the beginning, or how to convert what you've already got into a portfolio that serves the social housing sector. And we'll have to figure out which part of the sector it serves based on your portfolio. And again, meets those same criteria, you know, fixed income, fixed costs, really geared up to be attractive to an institutional investor, and then like get rid of the whole effing lot and actually enjoy retirement and actually enjoy the fruits of your labor, whilst knowing like you did good shit for really, really vulnerable people.
Dylan, thanks so much.
Thank
I
you
could
so
spend
much.
the whole afternoon with you, listening to all of that. Thanks a lot. And yeah, sorry we don't have more time. There's lots of questions about the contacts. I know you covered this, talk about who to reach out in the council and things like that. But probably a topic, you know, like on the masterclass, maybe you want to prepare to help people in different. There were people in Bristol, in Croydon, in different places like that. Maybe there's something like that you can, I don't know, you can prepare to help the guys when they join you on the. Can you tell a bit about the masterclass? Like is
So the
it
masterclass is going to go.
is it £10,000? How does it work?
No, but definitely bring your credit card. I mean, now you had a freebie. Now let's get serious. No, I'm joking. The masterclass is free. Of course, it's free. It's 2 hours, and I'll take you through essentially that 5-step model: social, SOCIAL.
Okay, fine.
Social. So essentially, the model social is going to teach you and show you what the steps are to get into the sector. And then after that, just to give you the roadmap, after that, there is a 3-day and a 6-week program that you can come on. And after that, there's also a more in-depth 6-month, 12-month mentorship that we can go on for those of you that are really looking to gear up and sell out to an institution. So look, total transparency here. It's an education model that you will have already come across. Masterclass free, so keynote free, masterclass free. Then you've got the opportunity to invest in further training, education, mentorship, coaching, counseling. You might need some counseling, consulting, should you choose to. But what you'll get at the masterclass, it's not kind of 60 minutes and job done. We're going to go deep dive into each of those steps of the model. So all the questions that you've got here about contracts and contacts and legals and systemizing, and how to get started, and what strategy to focus on, and who are the providers, and how do you contact the providers, and what are you saying? All of those things we'll cover on the masterclass. So think about this as a kind of a more insight sharing, inspirational sharing of the opportunity. Think about the 26th of February. Think about the masterclass as understanding the steps, actually getting all the steps, the tactics, if you like, and then think about the course and the mentorship and the mastermind really is executing on all of that, should you need help executing. But you'll get enough at the 2-hour masterclass to, if you want to go off and do this on your own, then by all means, go and do it. My key aim, to give you the broader context of what I want to do in our business, is house 1,000 vulnerable people. That might be families or individuals. There's an inordinate job ahead of us to do that. But over the course of this work that I'm doing with you and Property Filter and some of the other partners that I've got, is to house 10,000 vulnerable people in the next 3 years. So that's kind of the bigger context of what we're trying to do. Not yet. The 26th of Feb is the only date for now. We may release future dates for sure, but for now, that's the only date.
Is it on Zoom?
Yeah, it's yeah, exactly. It's a live stream.
Okay,
It's a live
awesome.
stream. So there will be a 72-hour replay as well. So if you wanted to register, there'll be a 72-hour replay.
Awesome. Dillon, thanks so much. Thank you, everybody. Do you have any closing thoughts, closing sentiment for today's session? Before I thank you formally, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Do you have any sort of closing sentiment, Dillon, for today?
Yeah, really lead with the heart on this. And I know that that's not what a self-made, I don't really like the term self-made millionaire, but it's not the thing that you'll hear from anybody teaching investment or strategy or money. But there's a quote by Rumi, the Sufi philosopher Rumi, and I kind of keep it around me all the time on a card. And it essentially, the cleaners have cleaned it up somewhere. It's somewhere here. But the card essentially says, follow the silent call of your heart, for it will never lead you astray. And I really believe that when you're looking to get into social housing, there are so many things that might put you off in the initial phases of your journey, because it's just such an unknown area and it's unfamiliar. And you know what the human brain is like. Anything that's unfamiliar, even if it has a massive payoff at the back end, anything that's unfamiliar, we just don't want to, fuck it, I'll just go back to what I know. But as Rumi says, follow the silent call of your heart. And if you've been inspired by anything I've shared in terms of what you can do to create that triple bottom line, income, impact, and influence, then yeah, follow your heart. Register for the masterclass or go and get some education somewhere and just do it, because it's a thoroughly rewarding way to be in property, in a way that serviced accommodation, HMOs, single lets, this is what I'm in the modern extension of a grade 2 listed restoration that we did. Like, none of that stuff has given me the fulfillment and the peace and ease that being in social housing has given me. So yeah, do it.
Dillon, thank you so much. Everybody else, thank you so much for joining us on today's Deal Final Corner. Take on Dillon offer to spend more time, to go deeper into these things, follow the social framework he's put together. In the meantime, visit propertyfilter.co.uk, log on to your Property Filter account, check on the deal blueprint, define your goldmine area, engage with motivated sellers, assess properties in seconds, load your pipeline and make deals. Have an endless supply of deals, join the top 1% of active property investors and become a high achiever deal sources. I hope you enjoyed today's Deal Final Corner, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dillon, for this incredible session, and thank you all for staying with us until the end today. Thanks so much, everybody.